Welcome to the Dr. Mudgil podcast. This is episode 70, and it's Thursday, March 23rd. And March 23rd is a very special day for the old doc. Today actually marks the 14th anniversary of me opening the doors to my New York City office. And every year since I opened my office, like this day has always just been a day where I kind of think about, the wins and losses of my small business, the lessons learned, and all of that sort of stuff, and just kind of take stock in the what I think is the amazing practice that I've been able to create with the help of lots of folks. And that's really what this podcast is all about. It's all about looking back and reflecting on the last 14 years. I can't believe it's crazy even to say that, and just to think about, like I said, the immense gratitude I have for so many folks that have really contributed so much in the development of my practice and over a decade, almost a decade and a half. But first, I think the first bit of gratitude goes to two very important ladies in my life. A lot of this stuff you've probably heard before. I've posted about this in a bunch of different podcasts, and I mentioned all the sort of this stuff in my book. But like the old man I am, some stories just get repeated, and I just can't help repeating them. So, the first bit of gratitude goes to my mom. My mom is an amazingly strong lady, someone who inspires me tremendously. She was is the single parent of two boys, which she largely raised on her own. My mom and dad got divorced when I was less than a year old. My dad was just a bad dude, and for my mom, being a doctor, she came here as an immigrant in the late 1960s, to start her residency in internal medicine, and then she slowly brought her entire family over, through those years, including my dad. I think a few years after she was here. But, like I said, he wasn't a great guy. And in the middle of the night, one night, when I was just a baby, my brother, who's 7 years older than me, was probably about, 7 or 8. My mom grabbed us in the middle of the night and, just escaped. And we ended up, I think, crashing at one of her friends' places. And she ended up divorced my dad and raising the two of us on her own. And, my mom wasn't like a flashy doctor that I think of in my mind when I think of like doctors in the 70s and 80s. She was a very low-key government doctor. In fact, she ended up ultimately serving in the Army Reserves and rose to the level of colonel, which was pretty cool. Our vacations growing up, we're going to Army bases in Europe. We'd go to Germany, almost every summer for a few years, where she'd serve her 2 years, and then she'd serve every weekend, or 1 weekend a month rather, as a reservist. But in her mind, and I think there's a lot of validity to this, her being a doctor is what enabled her to escape a dreadful situation and create a life for herself. And for her, being a doctor enabled her to do that. So for us, growing up, my brother and I, it was literally just drilled into our heads. Like, you must stand on your own 2 feet. So she didn't want us knocking on her door as adults, asking her for a handout. But part of that was, you must become doctors. It was just a non-negotiable. So my brother and I both, of course, listened to my mom, sometimes under duress, but both of us became doctors. My brother's an ophthalmologist in the Philly area, and I, of course, I'm a dermatologist in New York City. And, if it weren't for my mom, sometimes with a tough, heavy hand, forcing our way, I would never be doing what I'm doing now. So first bit of gratitude goes to my mom. And the second bit goes to my amazing wife. So my wife and I grew up with different backgrounds. I grew up, I would say, with a mindset of scarcity, averse to risk. And my wife grew up more with a mindset of abundance and, accepting of smart, calculated risks. And when I first thought about opening my practice, I was a year out of my fellowship. It must have been, it was 2008. It was the year 2008, early 2008. And I started working in the summer of 2007. And, I wasn't really super psyched with what I was doing, but my plan was to kind of get my feet wet and working as a pathologist and also working as a clinical dermatologist. I was splitting my time between two jobs. And, in a few years, my plan was to open my own office. But after doing what I was doing for a few months, I was kind of, getting dissatisfied. The practice where I was working, although it was a great practice and the doctors were amazing, wasn't quite the vision I had in my mind of what I wanted my practice to be. And around that time, my wife was back in 2007. My wife was pregnant with our first, and the apartment we were living in which actually made my wife move to when we first got married, wasn't fit for having children. So we had to sell it, and we had to move to rent an apartment that was just more suitable for a child. But the New York City market was very hot at that time. The real estate market was really, really hot. And we actually made a little bit of money when we sold our apartment. And we were sitting on, not a ton of money, but a little bit of money. And when I was explaining to my wife, like, my situation and my dissatisfaction with my current work environment. And, for me, even when I was in high school, my dream was always to have an office on Lower Fifth Avenue, right by Washington Square Park. It was always just like a dream I always had for myself. Like that part of Manhattan is called the Gold Coast of Fifth Avenue. And it's all these beautiful old pre-war buildings, but it's in the downtown neighborhood, which I love. Greenwich Village, which is my favorite neighborhood, or one of my favorite neighborhoods in New York City. And I always dreamed of having a practice there. And there was actually a space that opened up for sale in a beautiful building on Lower Fifth Avenue. The space was a total dump. I mean, this place was just, there was a doctor that had been working there that owned the space, but I don't know how he was able to do that. The place was really in terrible shape. But my wife encouraged me. We probably had, I think our daughter was like maybe 5 or 6 months old at the time, at first. And she basically bet on me. She said, listen, take all of our money, like every dollar that we have, and borrow whatever money you need and start your dream, start your practice. She really, if it were up to me, I'd be celebrating the 4 or 5 year anniversary of my practice. But because of her, it's now been 14 years. She really took a big gamble on me. She went way deep, 7 figures in debt with me. And, if it weren't for her, I never would be doing what I'm doing now, and would never have been doing it for as long as I've been doing it. So a lot of gratitude goes to my wife. The next group of people that I'm extremely grateful for are my amazing team. There's no way for one person to do this on his own, and I've been blessed to work with some amazing people over the last 14 years. Now, listen, everyone is not an all-star, but every, if you look at a sports team, a professional sports team, that has like an all-star player, they elevate everybody around them. And I've been blessed to have, a few all-stars through the years. And, those all-stars made the folks around them, work better and be more productive, et cetera. And quite frankly, those all-stars made me a better doctor. So I'm incredibly grateful for them. This is a story that I've actually shared before, but it really captures my team and how amazing they are. In the first week of the pandemic, it was March 2020, when New York City was shutting down. I think it was like the second week of March or something like that. That Friday that the city had just shut down, we had patients that were scheduled. And, some of our patients canceled, but we had patients scheduled, so we came in. And one of the patients we saw was a woman who was 9 months pregnant, had a huge abscess, and had we not been open, she would have ended up in an emergency room, which was filled with COVID patients, or an urgent care that was filled with COVID patients. And because we were open, we were able to take care of her in a very safe environment. And, I remember that day thinking that, we have to stay open, during this pandemic. And around that same time, basically every other dermatologist in New York City was posting on his or her Instagram that, hey, we're doing the responsible thing and we're going to shut down our offices and close during COVID. And, I'd say, a lot of them went out to their Hamptons houses and were, sequestered in their beach homes or vacation homes, et cetera. But I remember thinking to myself, I was like, we're effing doctors, and doctors, we don't run away from a pandemic. We run towards a pandemic. And there were a handful of us, a very small handful of us, dermatologists that actually kept our doors open during the pandemic. I remember talking to my staff and letting them know that, hey, guys, I told them the story with the patient that we saw. And I said, guys, we're staying open. And it was a period of great uncertainty. There was no vaccine for COVID. No one knew what the hell was going on. And I said to my staff, I was like, guys, we're going to stay open. Honestly, I'm not going to be able to pay you what I've been paying you, because we had to cut our hours and, really kind of manage on a much smaller scale than we're used to managing. And I said to them, I was like, I can't pay you what I've been paying you, but I also can't guarantee that I'll be able to bring you back. Like, I have no idea what's going to be going on, these next few months or however long this is going to end up lasting 3 years. But everyone on my staff said, we're staying. And every one of my staff stayed. We've revised our schedule. And I'm so grateful for them for doing that. And, that's why I believe we're the best dermatology practice in New York City, but I also think that we're the best in the world. But, fortunately by June of that year, just after a few months, I was able to bring back everybody full time. And, the last, actually, I would say the 2020, 2021, even 2022 were, they were tough. Finally, 2023, we were back to 2019 vibes in terms of the volume of patients we see in our office. But I never would have been able to do any of this without the support of my wonderful staff, and special shout out to the all-stars who've been on my team through the years. And of course, the last bit of gratitude goes to my patients. I mean, it's just such an honor that folks trust me with their care and have trusted me for the last 14 years. That very first week of my office, when my office was open, I still remember my very first patient. But that first week, I saw maybe 3 patients the entire week. And maybe that second week, I saw 4 or 5 patients. I had no patients. I just hung up my shingle. I didn't do any advertising. I would just literally live in my office. In fact, I was working another job while I had my office going. I was working 2 jobs, and I was just waiting for the phone to ring, and it wasn't ringing very much in those early days. And really, it took a few months. By the 3rd month, surprisingly, and I also didn't have I didn't have any income, so I was basically working another job and paying. I only had 2 staff members at the time, but I was basically paying them with the money I was making from my other job, paying my mortgage and my loans and all that stuff. So it was living solidly in the red. But after a few months, things started picking up. 3 patients turned into 6 patients. 6 patients turned into 12 patients. Yada yada yada. And by the 3rd month, I was actually able to cover my expenses, which was amazing. And fast forward to now, those 3 patients that first week has turned into nearly 45,000 patients that my practice has cared for through the years. And that to me is it's hard to wrap my head around it. And I have my patients to thank for it. Now some of my patients are grown and I'm taking care of their kids. Patients refer me their parents, their cousins, their brothers, their sisters, their best friends. And it's just been this slow, steady, organic growth through the last 14 years. And I think a lot of that is predicated on our strong belief in the golden rule. We try to treat everyone with the same level of care and compassion that we would treat our loved ones. And I'm so grateful for the trust that my patients have placed in my practice. So here's to 14 years of Mudgil Dermatology, and hopefully there'll be 14 plus many, many more. And my heart's filled with gratitude, and I'm taking that into this weekend. I hope you all have a wonderful, restful weekend and just ready to crush and dominate the week ahead. Let's get it.